Hello, I'm Tom Martin, and welcome to another episode of A San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin. I'm a lifelong journalist, having produced stories for CBS News, ABC News, and CNN over the years. And I love meeting interesting people, having thought-provoking conversations, and that's exactly what we do here on this podcast series, thanks to my co-host and the man of the hour, author David Parker. David is the author of Income and Wealth, a San Francisco conservative, and a new book of essays that'll be hitting the stands any day now. And David joins us from San Francisco. Hey, David, how are you today?
I'm fine. Nice to hear your voice. How are you doing, Tom?
Thank you, sir. I'm doing well, doing well. Always a pleasure to connect with you. And, it's funny. As I think you know, my dad was a lifelong newspaper editor, so I love that phrase, hot off the presses. It's kind of dwindling down, newspapers these days, but hot off the presses is a topic that I'd love to hear your thoughts about. This was something, it's so interesting. I covered politics in Washington for many years, and it's always interesting what they release on a Friday afternoon or on a holiday or something. But this one was the news that a bank not too far from where you live, I bet, Silicon Valley Bank, had failed. And so they were guaranteeing depositors' accounts up to, I guess the FDIC limit is $250,000. And then people said, well, should we guarantee all of the amounts? And how did this happen? And so on. That again, this is a national news story, even perhaps an international news story that hit very close to where you live. What are your thoughts about all that?
Well, this is just one more example of banks gambling, overextending credit. And in Silicon Valley, they were overextending credit kind of foolishly. Interest rates were down for such a long time. I guess there's not enough people in the bank with any experience having ever experienced the downturn. And so they're just loaning money like crazy based on very low rates. They were selling bonds. The bank was loaded with bonds, around $600 billion of bonds at a very low rate. All of a sudden, those bonds on paper are worthless because the rates have gone up, and when rates go up, prices go down. That's economics. And so the value of all the bonds in Silicon Valley Bank are worthless. And the bank, I guess if it's being monitored by the government or by the market itself, saying your history. And the other half of their investment was in cryptocurrency. That wasn't so smart either. So every downturn in the economy since the history of mankind, dealing with money, Babylon, all the way back, is overextension of credit, reckless overextension of credit, gambling. And every time there's a downturn, all the people who learn from that mistake, they're out. They lost their jobs and they're not in banking anymore, but now they have some experience. So the bank is, if it comes back, is full of young, new people who've had no experience. Guaranteed it'll happen again. Guaranteed. Every downturn is an overextension of reckless overextension of credit.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. If ever there was a sector or a location in America where there's probably a lot of speculation right now. I mean, all business, I guess, to some degree is speculation, hopefully wise speculation. But there in Silicon Valley, it seems like a lot of kind of gambling almost going on. And this really touches on a theme that you cover so well in your books. What is the proper role of government? And you just mentioned learning a lesson. If the government jumps in and said, we're going to take care of everything, don't worry. I understand, the need to assure everyone so it doesn't have a ripple effect through our entire economy. But what is the proper role of government in a situation like this?
Well, we've had crises in the past where banks were figuring, the government's going to bail us out. If things go bad, we have deposit insurance. So this country issues deposit insurance, and yes, they will make most depositors whole. But the government is not saying, it's not monitoring, or they're not monitoring it. The banks can do whatever they want with their money. It's called a moral hazard problem. And every time they have huge sums, and the banks have huge sums, during COVID, for example, all the banks filled up with money. It's one reason that after COVID demand is so high and we're having what appears to be inflation, which I don't call inflation, but it's a good word for it. And anyway, it's just, yeah, they gambled on the rates not moving. China is having the very same problem. They've built thousands or millions of condominiums and apartments. They're all vacant because the bank says, we have a guaranteed loans on these things, guaranteed buyers who are people who promise to buy these things. But then the rates went way up, and the cost of construction in China also went way up, and they stopped those things and nobody's buying them. So just because they had a guaranteed buyer and they've guaranteed the construction, they're sitting there vacant. Huge gamble. And Tim Cook, who I thought was doing pretty well with Apple, because it doesn't happen very often that a genius founder of a company leaves. In Steve Jobs' case, he died, and the next person almost can never handle it. Apple went broke in the 80s and 90s when Jobs and Wozniak left the first time. They had to come back and save the company and put it right back up on top again. And I couldn't believe that Steve Cook kept it there.
Tim Cook. Yeah.
Turns out, though, he gambled. And he said, all our supply for Apple Computer is coming from China. They built thousands of factories throughout that country. And China can go, you know what? You're going to do what we say because your whole company is dependent on us now. And and so we're boycotting or having trade tariffs. And Tim Cook says, I can't go along. I can't let Apple crash. I have to almost disobey the country and go along in China and just do whatever they say in a very un-American way. So if that backfires and Apple goes down, that'll be another example of the next CEO gambling.
Yeah, that would be huge.
And losing.
Yeah. No, that'd be huge. Well, I tell you, I just want to pause for just 1 second. For those of you joining us midstream here, if you're watching or listening, this is a San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin, asking questions in my role as journalist and hearing the thoughts of the well-researched thoughts and the great experience of Mr. David Parker from San Francisco. David, the author of Income and Wealth and a San Francisco Conservative, 2 great books, a 3rd great book coming soon. And so, but, getting back to Silicon Valley Bank and its failure, I'm learning so much about financial issues from you, David, over these conversations. I guess it never occurred to me that people, I guess maybe it's an obvious point, but it's possible to look at the track record of a bank, just like charities have ratings. Obviously, banks have ratings. They say, the 4 big banks, my bank is Citibank, are, quote unquote, too big to fail. But of the many regional banks, before a business, certainly a COO of whatever size company starts an arrangement, an affiliation with any regional bank, you'd think they would check their track record. But a lot of people said, I didn't realize that the management of Silicon Valley Bank was maybe not what you would hope it would be. And it's not just huge tech companies. I heard, on CNN, either today or yesterday, they had 2 ladies who started a little firm making stuffed animals for children and so on. It's like, oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to make our payroll. Is it appropriate for the government to step in and say, don't worry, I know it's only, the FDIC only guarantees $250,000, but you're going to be able to make your payroll. It's going to be okay. You spoke a minute ago about lessons learned. What, should the government really make everyone whole?
Every bank has a sign, a little sticker on the front door, insured by the FDIC. So up to a certain amount. So any depositor has a right to be bailed out. They're paying insurance. The banks are paying insurance for that. So, and they will be bailed out. The 2008 was called a financial crisis. It wasn't called an economic crisis. And at that time, the government was bailing out any bank that they thought they can get their money back eventually, because you can't let the financial system crash. that means the whole country and probably the whole world would crash. We'd be thrown back to the Middle Ages or something like that. So this is not that. This is a bank just acting irresponsibly. I have very large sums in some banks, and when I put money in, I ask the bank for a financial statement because I'm loaning you money.
Yeah.
You're not loaning me money. I don't care about. I want to see a financial statement, and I get it from them. And so I'm aware. There was a big company called Enron during the George Bush days. I forget, but they almost took the country down. And I saw their financial statements. And in fact, actually, in my new book coming out very soon, Rome 476, Crash, I show a financial statement for Enron Corporation. And you look at that and you go, this cannot be true. This is like looking at Bernard Madoff, who promised 30% return every year for 10 years in a row. Anybody with any common sense would say, not possible. Nobody does that. So it's fraud. So Enron was complete fraud. And I'm not sure Silicon Valley was fraud, but it was reckless. The banks are all loaded from COVID, are loaded with money. Chase and Citibank, like you say, and they're sitting on $500 billion worth of cash. They don't know what to do with it. And so they're loaning it out, and they're placing it into bonds for a steady income stream. But forgetting that interest rates low for 10 or 20 years, as they've been since the 2008 crisis, that's not a normal rate. 0.001 that's not a normal rate for an interest rate. It's too low. And all of a sudden rates shot up. They're higher than maybe they should be, but they're not that much higher than historic rates. They're not. We think they're really high now. They're not really high, but the jump is big, and so people are feeling it. I'm feeling it. I have properties. I sat down with my accountant 2 weeks ago. He said, "Man, look at your interest payments." And I says, "Man, I didn't look at them. They're really high, like much higher, like $50,000, $80,000 per property, higher." And I got tons of properties. So, man, so those rates, they're not really, really high, but the jump is enormous. Well, Silicon Valley, those value of all those bonds at low interest rate put out for long terms are value. They have no value. There's no value.
That's a huge shortfall. Yeah. Do you question? We often get excellent questions from our producer, Mark Allen, and here is one. What do you think of possible criminal prosecution against those bank executives?
That'll never happen. But that should have happened in the 2008 financial crisis. That's for sure. That was complete, absolute fraud, and the bankers admitted it because they thought that fraud was the new MO. Because Bill Clinton told all the banks, and told Fannie Mae, who buys the bank loans and gives the banks more money to loan again, go ahead and buy those subprime mortgages. They told Fannie Mae. The banks were making loans to people who didn't qualify. They had to have good credit, but they didn't qualify for the size of the loan that they were getting. And all of a sudden, they have to start paying the real payment. They were paying lower payments than they should have been paying. That was the deal to qualify for it. All of a sudden, those payments came due, and people couldn't pay them. And the whole housing market and the financial system was about to crash. It's just complete recklessness. And legislation in 2000, after Enron was called Sarbanes-Oxley, after financial crisis was called Dodd-Frank, we're going to clamp down. We're going to keep an eye on business. Who was watching Silicon Valley? They're not watching anything, or they pretend they are. And the banks, they go to Wall Street. How do we get around this? Here, we'll tell you how to get around. They get around everything. The banks don't care what the government does. They go around everything. Investors go around everything. Professional investors go around everything.
Yeah, it was interesting. Again, I happened to catch on the news recently. Again, I was covering politics in Washington in the 80s, and one of the prominent politicians at that time was Congressman Barney Frank from Massachusetts. And so when we hear about Dodd-Frank, it should relate to proper management and control of volatile issues like this. Apparently, former Congressman Barney Frank is on the board of a bank, so it makes me wonder.
Also during the Bush period when there was Enron, Gray Davis was the governor of California, and they were having blackouts in California. PG&E was failing, and Enron was failing, and it's not unrelated. And so they threw out the governor. Schwarzenegger came in, became our governor. But when they threw out all the heads of PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric Company, they realized afterward, who's going to take over the company now and run it? And there was nobody qualified. They hired them all back.
Oh.
and those guys says, we'll come back and we want a minimum of $1 million of salary per year for life. And we'll straighten this out. We messed it up. Now we'll straighten it out. You don't need to monitor us. If we don't care, you're gonna use us no matter what the situation is, and we're gonna clean up. And we have what's called a Public Utilities Commission. Every state has that for public utilities, and because some of them are owned by they're owned by the state in some ways, and so they monitor what they're giving, who they're giving money to. But the big corporations, there's a word for that. They capture the members of the board. They say, you vote in a way that's favorable for us, and when your commission expires, we're going to put you on our board at $1 million a year for life. Okay. So
yeah.
Capture all those guys, just like it's like drug dealing. You want to save a drug dealer, you give him a suitcase full of money to the cop. Here's $500,000. Let this guy go. $500,000. Okay, he can go. That's how it works.
Wow.
That's how Mexico lives. It's all drug cartels that's doing exactly that.
Wow. Well, on that visual, that is quite a visual. I think we're out of time for this conversation, but it's certainly been interesting as always. I want to encourage everybody to be sure to visit David's website, davidparkeressays.com. You can read his work, his essays, and so on right there. You can also purchase copies of his books, Income and Wealth and a San Francisco Conservative, on his website or on Amazon.com. And please be sure to visit our YouTube channel. Search for a San Francisco Conservative, the podcast. You will find it. I hope you'll subscribe, and please let us know your thoughts in response to our conversations here. We really welcome that. And David, would you like to add a couple of words about your books, and again your new book, Rome 476?
Well, I'll add the comment that I usually add, and was actually the essence of today's podcast, that these things are not new. They repeat. They're timeless. And I give examples going back to Babylon all the way up to the present of everything that's happening today has happened in the past. And I don't know why we can't learn from it. Maybe it's human nature. There's a famous expression, those who don't know history are condemned to repeat it. And I always add, and those who do know history are also condemned to repeat it. So you can throw that phrase away.
Wow. Yeah. Well, wonderful books. And again, I love how they're from the perspective of a true entrepreneur working in the trenches there, as I like to say, instead of removed, in an ivory tower somewhere. So they're great books. And I certainly encourage all of our listeners and viewers to read them. So thanks, David. I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Tom. Have a nice day.